Okay, I believe we can get started. So welcome everyone. We'll be talking about shining the limelight on virtualization, and you will see what this really means. We'll be covering best practices for insightful IT infrastructure monitoring. And my name is Stan Markov. Many of you know me already. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Runecast. And I'm thrilled that I'm joined here by Bill Fitzpatrick, who is the CEO and Chairman of Loop1, one of our great partners. Bill, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Stan. It's good to be with you today. Congratulations on Uptime.
Thank you.
As a fan of Runecast, I have to say I've watched your organization for a number of years now, and really pleased to now be a part of the partner network and helping to carry that Runecast story into the marketplace. So a little bit about myself. I am the founder and CEO of a group out of Austin, Texas called Loop1, and we are IT operations management experts. We help organizations around the world, primarily with various types of monitoring and monitoring technologies. And so we are really, really pleased to have the Runecast solution as part of our solution set. We also drive our client conversations using what we call the Loop1 monitoring maturity model. It's a framework that we've created, and we'll talk a little bit more about it today during the presentation. And my background is engineering. While I am the sort of accidental CEO of Loop1, it wasn't really what I set out to do at the beginning of my career. I started out as a systems engineer with Microsoft in the test organization. And then I moved into some cybersecurity work for a number of years as a CISSP, as network engineering work that I did for a number of years before finally a short time that I worked with SolarWinds in North America before co-founding Loop1. And yes, I am also suffering from some self-inflicted punishment training for a full distance Ironman triathlon, which I hope to complete in 2023. So.
Wow,
glad to be here, Stan.
Yeah. Yeah, great to have you. And it's great that both of us actually have this perspective from being in the trenches, in the field, maintaining IT environments and really feeling the pain of sysadmins or network admins. And just as you didn't expect to be a CEO one day, that's the same for me. That was not really my goal. But really that was the way to accelerate building something innovative and something that could really help admins and organizations improve the way they do IT operations. So a bit of background on me. I spent many years in IBM. I started working with VMware technologies at the time when VMware was basically used for test and development purposes. And at some point, everybody started virtualizing even their most critical workloads. So that really enabled me and my colleagues to build a big VMware Center of Excellence within IBM. We got highly certified. I became VCDX, a VMware instructor, and we got to define best practices and security technical specifications for IBM customers globally. And also we had to firefight a lot of problems on the on the systems of our customers that are running VMware. And actually, before we move into the Lime framework, I really like to tell this story because it's really a product and what we do is really built by admins for admins. And I wanted to tell you how we decided to build Runecast Analyzer. As we were firefighting all of these problems like outages and security issues, performance issues on the customer systems, we realized that over 90% of the root causes of those problems were already documented somewhere online, either in the VMware knowledge base or some security guidelines, documentation, blog articles, or even the hardware compatibility list. So we thought that if we find a way to automatically harness all that human-readable unstructured knowledge and turn it into machine-readable rules continuously, we could help customers discover those risks before they strike, before they cause outages, before they cause some security problems like breaches, or some maybe performance or manageability problems. So this is how the idea of Runecast was born, and we didn't actually have experience with working with something so proactive. We felt that it was time really for something like that to come to light. And this is really the reason why we decided to, at some point, quit IBM and really to start developing Runecast Analyzer. Runecast was launched back in 2015, so we've been on the market for already 6 years. And naturally, as the world moved on to more of a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and lately also adopting more and more containers and Kubernetes, that's how we evolved as well. Originally supporting VMware technologies and various VMware products. We then extended the functionality of Runecast Analyzer over to AWS, Azure, and Kubernetes, so that we can cover the use case for hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, where many of the companies currently end up having, including Runecast, which is a fairly small organization. We do have infrastructure which is on-prem, and we're using a little bit of AWS, we're using Kubernetes, and even a little bit of Azure. So many of the enterprises actually are already in that situation. And of course, the admins or the people that are managing all that environment, they have to learn all the time and really up their skills. Which in many cases it's humanly impossible really to be an expert in everything and to be on top of all the latest best practices, vulnerabilities, or known issues or bugs. And that's where Runecast comes in, because it comes in with all that expertise, which is updated on a weekly basis. And it really helps you proactively discover risks and best practice violations, vulnerabilities in your hybrid cloud environment. So for those of you that didn't know Runecast or you're not up to date, I just wanted to give you this preview before we move on to the maturity framework. So maybe over to you, Bill, because
Sure.
I'm really, maybe before you start, I'm really happy that we're having this session, because I remember you introducing Lime to me, the L1M3 framework 3 years ago. And I believe this is the time when you were starting. So I'm really interested to hear. I thought it was absolutely great, and I'm really curious to see how it plays out in reality and your experience also with customers. But yeah, the floor is yours. It would be great if you could tell
Sure.
us what Lime is.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. Yeah, so we began development of this model back in 2018. And really, where it began was with a desire not too different than what you're doing in the Runecast product, where you've productized and automated through machine capabilities that human understanding of the risks in the configuration of a given environment. We had, beginning in 2009 through 2018, we were approaching 10 years of experience in running a variety of monitoring tools and technologies, and having developed best practices across that time frame. And we were really looking for a way that we could communicate those best practices and give organizations a better way to sort of score themselves and gauge how well they were doing in their maturity journey for their practices, as well as helping to define a bit of a roadmap and a work plan to say, here's where we have potential gaps or weaknesses, and we want to be able to address those and drive into a more mature place. The other thing that we really wanted to do is give clients the ability to understand what good looks like, especially as we start to talk about a more mature environment where there begins to be much more value that can be derived from the information that your tools provide. A lot of organizations invest thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, into their tools platforms, and then they only get a fraction of the functionality that those tools can provide. And so that's what sort of drove the creation of the model. So on this page, on this slide, we just have a snippet of the virtualization tier. And in a moment, I'm going to show the rest of the grid that covers the whole stack. But you'll see here, it references what we call the 5 phases of maturity, starting with ad hoc on the left and getting all the way up to insightful on the right. And we're going to go through those phases in a couple of minutes in more detail. But I want to just touch on optimized for a second, because you'll notice under optimized it says specialized monitoring and specialized sizing and capacity plans, along with automation and improved dashboards for improved visibility, basically. And that's where I really see Runecast helps drive organizations into this optimized and insightful tier of maturity, because Runecast is a very specialized tool, but it's a tool that does something that is absolutely necessary to have a safe and secure environment. And also the way that you can use Runecast to not only audit and verify compliance in your on-prem VMware environment, but also, as you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, for the cloud with Amazon, with Azure, and of course, Kubernetes being a massive a piece of the global infrastructure these days. So why don't we take a look then at the larger model? What we've got here is basically what we call our self-assessment grid. And again, we've got those same 5 phases of maturity, and we'll talk about those in more depth in a moment. But I'll just highlight quickly on the left side here, you'll notice that we have not only the traditional sort of application monitoring, server, database, virtualization, storage, and network, right? So something that probably sounds really familiar to many of the participants on the call today in terms of parts of their organization that they may specialize in. And in particular, folks that probably specialize in hybrid cloud and the virtualization associated with that. But at the very top, we include service management. And the reason we do that is because we fully believe that to really effectively have a mature operations environment for IT, you really have to have strong incident management. And so that's one of the things that we really try to help clients develop across their tools is integrations between their tools, as well as integrations into an incident management platform, whether that's something like ServiceNow or something like SolarWinds Service Desk, or any number of help desk or ticketing management systems or full-blown incident management systems. It's really a necessity to get the right outcomes. And coming back into the integrations with Runecast, I know that in previous versions that your team has actually built an integration back to SolarWinds Virtualization Manager, for example. And so we see those integrations as critical in terms of helping organizations to correlate the information that they're getting out of their tools. So I don't know if you want to comment on that a little. Go ahead, Stan.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely crucial, especially, well, not only larger organizations, but any organization out there. For sure, you will end up with having various tools and platforms. So collecting all that data in one central place and really integrating with service management is a must-have, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why we launched earlier this year also our ServiceNow plugin. Because Runecast definitely provides very insightful, unique information that helps you optimize your environment. But we had a lot of requests from customers that we want to have automatically created tickets based on certain rules, or maybe even change control, because that's typically the next step for someone to go in and remediate and optimize parts of the environment. We, as many other tools and platforms out there, also provide full REST API. So even if we don't provide some integration out of the box like ServiceNow or SolarWinds vMan, certainly our REST API is, you can do anything you want with the REST API that you can do with the graphic user interface, so you can use it to integrate with any other system out there.
Yeah, and so that's really where we start to talk about optimized. So let's go into the themes here that we have behind these phases. This is one of the first things that we try to share with clients, is to understand how to keep score of where you are right now. And so we put a lot of thought into the phrasing that we used here. And sometimes this ends up sounding a bit like marketing jargon, but I'll go through and we'll talk about the themes here, and we'll try to understand kind of why we chose the phrasing that we chose. So the first theme that we have, we call it being ad hoc. And we consider the theme of ad hoc to be basically high risk. And so a lot of times where we see this risk in smaller organizations is that they just don't have the investment in the tools. And sometimes that's for budgetary reasons. And so they're left trying to close gaps with limited budget perhaps, or limited training. And that leaves the organization exposed to risk. That's not the only place that we see risk surface, though. Where we also see risk surface is due to poor visibility. And that is oftentimes a result of a lack of awareness of what's possible. And that's where we love to talk about Runecast, because there are so many organizations, especially in North America, as we sort of tell the Runecast story, they just didn't know that there were tools like Runecast in the marketplace that could do this automation of identifying compliance issues so easily. And so we consider some very mature organizations to still be at high risk because they don't have the tools in place to do what Runecast can do. So I think, I would imagine, Stan, you've seen a lot of that in the organizations that you've helped that have deployed Runecast, where they can really eliminate this risk by adding that visibility.
Yeah, definitely. And you can see when prospects see Runecast for the first time, and especially when they try it in their environment and they deploy it, and they see how quickly they can already get the information that they really need and get that visibility. You can see how much bad experience they've had in the past, also with other platforms that they've tried, that might take them days to actually deploy, to get up and running, and maybe another week or two or more to actually learn how to use them and to make some sense out of the information. So yeah, certainly, typically we see that Runecast is a breath of fresh air for such organizations once they get a view of their environment the way that they've never seen it before, and uncover these potential risks, and in such a short period of time.
Yeah. And I think building on risk, the next thing that we have is this concept of being fragmented. Now, when we say fragmented, what we're really saying is that we have some teams within an organization that generally will have a larger tool investment or a larger tool footprint. Sometimes we'll also refer to this as tools being siloed. Now, I don't really consider silos to be a bad thing. I think of things like a missile silo, for example, is a good thing. We want structure and security and strength. And so silos really bring depth of expertise. Where silos fail us in our maturity model is when they don't communicate with each other. So what we really prefer is not just silos, but what we call fully meshed silos. Silos that share information, but have that expertise and depth of understanding. And so where you may have a good tools investment, but you're not sharing that information, that's definitely an opportunity for maturity. And that's also where we see Runecast being able to help as organizations move through this maturity model. The presence of Runecast gives greater correlation and visibility that can be shared across teams. So if there's a database team that's dependent on a part of the virtualization environment, they can understand the correlation of risk that might be present depending on the compliance of that particular system that is hosting those databases. And then the same is true as you go up the stack, whether it's a server services or applications that are being hosted. You need to have that correlated understanding and move from fragmented, but avoid what most organizations end up in, which is what we call typical. And the theme of typical is just noise. And this is what we see when there's an over investment in tools and a lack of understanding of what those tools can do. So in this case, we're talking about probably too many tools. So there's likely an opportunity for consolidation, as well as reduced costs by eliminating unnecessary tools. And there's generally overlap between those tools. So in the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the assessments that we do. And one of the things that we focus on is making sure that there's an understanding of what each tool's capabilities are, so that you can identify that redundancy and help to do tool rationalization or tool consolidation. And The other issue that we see, though, still in that typical phase is that even though there's this abundance of tools and abundance of information, it's oftentimes too much information. So despite having all of this information, there are still gaps in compliance, and there's gaps in remediation being performed. And drawing back to Runecast once again, this is an area where we see Runecast helping to solve problems, because while organizations may be awash in information about their environment, they're not able to make good conclusions about that information because they don't have all of the pertinent information. So tools that are out there telling organizations about, for example, the performance of a virtual environment or the performance of the cloud is still missing that gap that the Runecast tools cover in terms of that correlated information about the virtual environment itself.
Yeah, totally agree, and we've seen it over and over again, and especially the overinvestment in various tools, especially enterprise customers that we go to. Very often they purchase tools that are very expensive, that overlap. The vendor sales team was great. They managed to sell that particular tool or platform. And when I usually ask them, so okay, are you using that, or how are you using it? Very often I get a response, well, we have it installed, but yeah, someday we will use it, I guess. And the other thing is that many of these platforms, in many cases, they offer a lot of information or a lot of noise, and maybe increase your stress levels because they tell you there might be some potential problem here or there, but they don't really get to the end of the story. Okay, what is the problem? What is the root cause? Tell me how to remediate it and to avoid it in future. So we always, whatever functionality we add into Runecast, we always try to complete this story and really to not provide just noise, but tell the admins what they really need to know. Do I have a problem? What is the root cause? How can I solve it? And now we offer also remediation, so you can also generate a script that will solve it automatically for you. It can also create a ticket or a change in ServiceNow automatically for you. I'll give one specific example, actually. The Runecast does a lot of configuration analysis, but also log analysis. And many of the log analysis tools out there, they give you hundreds of dashboards and search functionalities and various correlations. But what Runecast does, it looks into the incoming log entries, and in real time, it matches them to problematic log patterns from the VMware knowledge base and other sources. So it directly tells you, because of these log entries coming from this server, you're experiencing exactly this problem here. This is the root cause, and this is how to solve it, or this is the workaround. That's one example I wanted to give. And the other is that comes to mind is with security compliance. Other tools out there that do some security compliance analysis against PCI DSS, for example, will tell you if, for example, firewall is not enabled, or SSH is enabled, or some other technical setting which is incompliant. But they will not tell you typically how is that important, or how is that related to PCI DSS, or which part, which security control and requirement of PCI DSS that satisfies, and why. So in Runecast, we not only map these technical configurations and checks to security controls and requirements from PCI DSS and other standards, but we have also described with written justification why this particular technical configuration is satisfying this security control and requirement from PCI DSS in particular. And that's really what the auditors want to know. If you have some audit coming in, they will just open up their PCI DSS document and they'll ask you to prove that you are compliant against their document. And that's something you can get out of the box in Runecast.
And that's a good segue to what we talk about in terms of getting from being a typical organization in terms of maturity to what we call optimized.
Yeah.
And in the optimized place, what we're really talking about is effective correlation, the ability to know what the relationships throughout the environment are in ways that help you make informed decisions and respond more quickly with greater understanding to the conditions that are uncovered. So whether it's an availability issue, a performance issue, or an audit and compliance issue, you're aware of not only the risk, but as you mentioned, Stan, you have an understanding of what needs to be done to correct it. And you know what that process is going to look like in terms of making those corrections and any potential impact to the rest of the environment, because you have a correlated view of the entire infrastructure. And so Runecast, through the integrations that we've talked about, is just a natural fit there to help tell that story. And then, of course, as you were mentioning, knowing what to do, well, that's really what drives outcomes. And so outcomes is a theme of that top tier, what we call insightful. And insightful is a bit of a buzzword right now. There's lots of people talking about tools delivering insights, but we're really talking about more than that. We're talking about knowing with great confidence that you can trust the data that's in your tools. I've seen so many circumstances where clients say, well, we think the tools are telling us this, but they have uncertainties because there's either issues with the way the data was collected, or there's issues with not having collected all of the right data from all of the right sources, so they have incomplete information, or there's issues with understanding what actions they should be taking based on what the tools have told them. And so once again, I think that's where Runecast really helps to eliminate those concerns, because it does do such a fine job of providing recommendations and remediations for the issues that it finds. So let's take that a little bit deeper, right? So this slide, I think, sometimes in talking to clients and organizations, they're like, yeah, this all sounds fine and good, but how do you really go dig into this? How do you really understand our environment, and how do we really make good changes and make ourselves better? So to drive the conversation, we've created what we call the six maturity assessment areas. And we're going to go through these relatively quickly, but there's a couple that I want to go into a little bit more detail, and really just starting with the first one. The first one is what we call the adoption and enablement for a given set of tools. And this is all about understanding stakeholders. And whether this is infrastructure, or whether this is just a particular piece of the environment, or whether this is application delivery to end users, as you can imagine, there are lots of different stakeholders across an organization. And so the approach that we take is usually to understand who our executive stakeholders are, who our application owners are, who our administrators are that can actually affect change in the configuration and deployment of the application, and then finally who our end users are, right? And there could be a blend in there. Sometimes the executive team is also an end user, and sometimes the administrators are also the application owners. But the idea is that each of those stakeholder types has an influence over what we're going to do with the tools. The other thing that we find as we start to discuss these tools with the stakeholders is that there are oftentimes more folks that need access to the tools than who have access. And so that leads us to help create new and interesting ways to get visibility to the data that the tools can provide. So like in a Runecast scenario, for example, there may be virtualization administrators or cloud administrators that have direct access to the tools, but then they need to be able to share that information easily with a security team or an audit team. Does that sound familiar, Stan?
Absolutely, yeah. That's typically the case. Yeah.
And so that's what we see as we start to have that conversation from adoption and enablement. We move into an understanding of what's possible. So as we start to engage stakeholders, it's not unusual for them to not know what could be done. And this is where you kind of end up in that typical space in the maturity phases, because they make an investment in the tools. They know there's one or two key features that they purchased that tool for, but they don't necessarily understand all of the features that are available. And so we call this being feature complete through having a solid feature awareness. And what I find sometimes people hear is they hear, okay, well, we're going to be feature complete. So you're telling me we're going to use every feature in the tool that we purchased? And that's not really what we're driving towards. What we want to do is ensure that you understand what's possible so that you can use those features that you choose to use. And if there's something that you're not using, it's not because you didn't know, but it's because you looked at it and decided it wasn't something you needed.
Mhm.
as opposed to what we see so often today is they just didn't know what was possible. Go ahead, Stan, comment there.
Yeah, I was going to comment. This happens already with Runecast as well. I mean, we are planning actually to introduce a better user guiding in the product because we're coming up with new features all the time, and our customers that have subscribed, they're getting them as part of their subscription, and we are trying to communicate all of that over email and other ways, but we will have also in product a better focus on everything new that we're releasing, because I've seen with some customers, for example, the HCL upgrade functionality that helps you simulate vSphere upgrades. Even 1 year after we released, I still spoke to some customers that were not aware of it and that were really pleasantly surprised and excited to have something like that already in the product. So um, I don't know what people on the call think, but I think that's valid for many of the products out there. You really have to, as you said, look into it, look what capabilities it offers. You might be surprised. And yeah, the point is not really to use all the capabilities, but to be aware and to choose, really, to make an informed choice what you're going to use actually in production.
Yeah, there's a funny story from a client that we worked with here in North America. They owned some very, very expensive tools, and the way they described it was that they went out and they bought the Ferrari, they parked it in the garage, and all they used it for was to listen to the radio. And I thought that was a good analogy, because when we do the tool consolidation exercises where we're really focusing on the tools that provide the most value and allowing us to eliminate tools that are expensive and not necessarily providing value, that that understanding of feature awareness and feature completeness is what can help drive that. So the next aspect that we look at is, what is it that we are collecting? And we call this the performance and availability metrics, because you'll see in a moment we've got a separate set of questions around compliance. And so the reason we ask this question from a performance and availability perspective is really just about making sure that when we get into an analytics conversation, we've collected the right information. So in recent years, even really pre-COVID, we had some on-site engagements that were focused on CIOs. And the theme of those conversations was data analytics. They had moved on from having cloud conversations to really having conversations about what are they doing with the data that they have in their environment. And one of the first things that they discovered is that they didn't know what data they had. And as they started to understand the data, they realized that they had data they didn't need, data that didn't provide value to them. And as an inverse to that, they also discovered that there was data they would have liked to have had that they didn't collect. And so we really try to make sure that as part of the maturity conversation, we're collecting the right information from the right places in the environment. And then as we continue that conversation from a security perspective for security and compliance, we really find that it sort of breaks into two categories. We've got configuration security, right? And that's a big piece of what Runecast brings to the table in terms of audit, remediation, contributing to change management. And then also operational security, which once again, Runecast shines from an operational security perspective. We're really talking about the events that are generated out of our systems and that log analysis. And as you mentioned earlier, from a Runecast perspective, you've got that log analysis capability. And not only can you process those events and logs, but you can give clear direction on what to do with them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think this is sort of the bread and butter of Runecast, actually, security and compliance. So especially in the last few years, we have added a lot of security compliance standards. I mentioned PCI DSS already, but Runecast is scanning against CIS, HIPAA, even GDPR, DISA-STIG, NIST, and many other standards. So the list goes on and on. As you know, especially in the last couple of years, security has become a hotter and hotter topic, and so did security compliance, and audits have become more stringent. Auditors want to see not only the current snapshot of security compliance, but also historical records, and that's also something that you can see with Runecast. So yeah, I would say that we can provide a lot in this aspect.
Yep, precisely. And that's why we think that the Runecast is such an important part of the maturity conversation for organizations, because it closes those gaps, it provides that visibility, and it allows us to really ensure that we have the security that we need. So then the next portion of the model is what we call automation and integration. And this is kind of where I have a little fun with it, because as we all know, AI is a big buzzword and machine learning is a big buzzword, and everybody's doing a little bit of something with it. But what people really need to be doing from our perspective is a better job of automation and integration. So we kind of call it AI for the rest of us, right? Real AI. Let's get things automated. Let's get things integrated. And so you mentioned, right, that Runecast has the REST API. And of course, you've talked a little bit about the automation for remediation that Runecast offers. And so once again, it's a good fit into that maturity conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, AI is a really overused term. In fact, we do use AI in our internal platform that we call Rika. It's Runecast AI Knowledge Automation. It's really the platform that's monitoring and crawling all of these sources of human readable unstructured data like knowledge bases, security guidelines, and so on. And using natural language processing, it helps us turn those into machine readable rules that go into Runecast Analyzer, the flagship product that's shipped to customers. In Runecast Analyzer, we have deterministic rules. So I wouldn't call that AI, what we have in Runecast itself. But it's certainly automation, and we have over 3,000 rules already there. And yeah, of course, with
And
the
I
REST
think
API.
that's really the key, because I think sometimes clients talk to vendors and they say, well, do you do AI? Because it's almost like a checkbox that they have now, but they don't think about what that really means for outcomes. And so, okay, yes, it has AI, but what are you doing with that information? And so I like the way that you described it. You use AI within Runecast to improve the quality of the tool by processing all of this data that's available around known issues and remediation. But you really give that power back then to the end user to take action with it and create that opportunity to do correlation and drive automation and integration through the interface.
Yep, exactly.
So that finally brings us to the final piece of the maturity assessment model, which is analytics and outcomes. And this is really the piece that I think everybody is pushing to get to. One of the first areas that we saw this come into fruition was really, as we mentioned earlier, kind of ServiceNow integrations, helping to drive incident management. And to a large extent, that certainly affects outcomes. But we've also seen some intelligent dashboarding efforts in the industry. We've seen organizations working with tools like Tableau or Big Panda or MoogSoft in an effort to try to do more correlation. And so that's really where we're focused here, is just helping the clients to understand, what is it that the tools they have can do in terms of driving analytics, and then building on the things that we've already discussed here. Who's using the tool? How are they using it? How's it deployed? Are we using all the correct features? Are we collecting all of the right information? Are we taking advantage of all of the security and compliance capabilities, and especially with a tool like Runecast? Have we automated it and integrated it? Because we do all of those things correctly, it's going to drive greater value into dashboards or analytics solutions that allow us to then really drive business conversations. So talking about forecasting, talking about budgets, talking about training for staff, right? There's a lot of, and talking about how much staff you need. I know, Stan, we were talking the other day about this. Sometimes a tool like Runecast can find so much work to do that you really do have to be able to put it into a forecast and help manage that workload.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the reality. And having the remediation functionality certainly alleviates that. It helps you automate the remediations. And the fact that with the ServiceNow plugin, you can create the changes as well. But especially coming into a larger environment, within the first phase especially, there will be certainly some time investment that needs to be planned. It's for a good cause. It's a good investment because it will reap a lot of benefits for the long term. But yeah, certainly it's necessary to have this visibility and to have proper planning to move to the next level, basically.
Yeah, and so that's kind of a good point here to where we can kind of summarize a little bit and talk a little bit about why we created the Lime model. And really, it's just that we wanted to be able to give organizations something that was easy to use, but less burdensome than full ITIL, for example. So I know, especially in Europe, there's a lot of organizations dedicated time and people and resources to aligning themselves to the ITIL models. And I think there's great value in that. But for some organizations, that can just be too much for them to take on. And so we kind of consider, our model to be a little bit like a flexible ITIL. You can take the pieces that you need, and you don't necessarily have to go to the extent that ITIL drives you to. But at the same time, being able to get those benefits of understanding where you are, what's working in your organization, where are the areas for improvement, and what's the roadmap along with the tools to drive that maturity.
I think that it's really great to take a step back, because I think when you go into organization, a lot of things are historical there. Yeah, it's, people also don't know why they're using certain product, why they're doing things in a certain way. And if a third party with such experience and such framework comes in, and they have the fresh look, fresh view on how things are handled in that organization, I think that's really super useful. And bringing actually such a guided approach to assess where things are at the moment and how to make them more optimized, more insightful. Yeah, I really loved this model like 3 years ago when you introduced it to me, and I was just curious how the last 3 years have been since you actually worked with many clients already with this model.
It's been really a great journey, and what we have seen is that we have been able to expand and deepen our relationship with our clients. So in years past, where we might have had a client that made a small investment and that covered maybe 5 or 10 days of services, now it's far more common for us to work with a client on an annual basis, where we really have the time to partner and get into the details that we saw there in that assessment areas. Because while a lot of organizations might engage professional services to get some quick answers, ultimately that just leaves a greater burden on a team that's usually got too much work to do to begin with. And so we've found that it's been very effective to then partner with those organizations on a longer term basis, which frankly also allows us to help drive the cost of that engagement down, so to speak. Obviously, over time, the investment is larger, but in terms of the rates that are involved, they're lower rates because they're over a longer period of time. And so it's been really good. We've been able to establish a much deeper and much longer term relationships with our clients to be able to really work through the model and help drive those improvements. And we're looking forward to including Runecast in that conversation and really closing the gaps on visibility as we begin to engage with more clients around the North American market and across Europe in the Runecast conversation. So we have a couple of minutes left here. We can do some questions, I think, and then we'll be close to wrapping up.
Yeah, feel free to put any questions you may have or comments in the room chat. I believe we can also unmute you if you wish to just join the conversation. If you are
so if this is your first time seeing the model, if there are questions that you have around the Runecast capabilities, feel free to raise your hand in the chat or throw a question into the room chat, please. Looks like we have one question here in the room chat asking, what are the most common issues that Runecast uncovers?
Yeah, that's quite a long answer. Maybe I can give because we've seen all kinds of things, and of course, whenever the customers decide to share, because we don't collect information from our customers, everything stays within the customer organization. But typically, when a customer deploys, there are quite a big number of, if it's a VMware environment, there could be quite a number of knowledge base articles. For example, risks for purple screen of death that may be uncovered in the environment. Spectre meltdown is also quite commonly seen. They can uncover maybe more simple things, but quite dangerous, like for example SSH being enabled, or in case of AWS S3 buckets that are exposed to the public or not being encrypted. So there's really a ton of things. Actually, when it comes to AWS and public cloud, very often we see from customers that just deploy Runecast that they uncover some assets that they're being built for in the cloud in regions, for example, AWS regions, that they didn't know that they had any assets. So it's even sometimes not that much about uncovering some risks in the configuration or the logs, but in case of cloud, also uncovering some potential to optimize your bill and maybe remove some assets that you don't have to pay for. Maybe it's good to mention also, well, security compliance is a whole other area, but the hardware compatibility list, that's something that almost always the hardware compatibility list analysis can uncover some incompatibility in your environment. For example, driver firmware combination on some IO device on some server which is not compatible. And that typically can cause really unexpected issues. Sometimes performance, sometimes it can crash the whole server. So it's really interesting. In fact, we are able to offer a free trial, so you can request a free trial for Runecast. We have a link here, so if you use the link, I think I put it also in the notes. So I would say the best way to find out is really to deploy it in your environment and get a taste of it.
Yeah, and the deployment's really easy. It just takes a matter of minutes, and really within a couple of hours, you can start to see some insights around your environment based on the built-in Runecast awareness of the issues that we've talked about for audit and compliance. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
All right. Well, that brings us to the conclusion. Do you want to wrap up, Stan?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Bill. Yeah, we're both CEOs and we're used to be leading the conversation, so I was not sure which one of us is going to wrap up. I just want to thank everyone that joined this session and today. Overall, I'm really excited to be having this conference and really excited to have covered this with you, Bill. I think it's absolutely must-have model. And your role as a third party coming in and guiding customers, I think it's really invaluable. So I think everybody should consider actually getting this assessment and working with you on this. So thank you again for joining. Thank you all, and we'll see you on the next session and hopefully on the quiz in the end of the day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stan. Take care.
Take care.